everybody out there on the interweb, all you students out there ready to learn something today. Hopefully you have your notebook, you have something to write with, and you are ready to actively engage in listening to this. So first things first, what are we talking about? We're talking about the growth of the colonies. We're moving out of the 1600s to the 1700s, and the growth of not just the North, but the South as well, and the different types of things that are going to develop there within both of those areas. So first things first, the learning outcomes for today. There are 4 of them. What are cash crops? How do they differ between the North and the South? Number 2, what is the Middle Passage? Number 3, why is the Stoner Rebellion important? And number 4, how did the Enlightenment and Great Awakening affect the colonies? These 2 things, Enlightenment and Great Awakening, are really going to have a significant impact on these colonists during this time period. So the plantation economy, it's going to be developed in the South. It's going to become their main form of economy. They're self-sufficient plantations. There's no need for markets. There's no need for bakeries or tailors or anything like that. If it needs to be done, it's being done on that southern plantation. End of story. Okay. They're found along rivers, and really it's for irrigation and a few other purposes. There is no electricity, of course, but the main reason is they got to ship their stuff to the North somehow, and this is going to allow them to do that directly and not have to worry about anything else. You can see here in the little map here, there's pigs, there's indigo, there's rice, and tobacco. And we're going to talk about 2 of those in just a second. But you can see from Maryland all the way down to Georgia. This is the area of those southern colonies. You can see here from the map 1750. And the southern cash crops. Now, 1 crop per plantation, 2 major crops overall. First one being tobacco. We're going to find this more so in the upper South, in Virginia, in North Carolina, hence the North Carolina Tar Heels, Tobacco Road, all of that good stuff. The second one, indigo, this is more farther south. You can kind of see from this picture here, it's what it is used for is blue dye. And the plantation owners itself, these guys are the fat cats of the time. They are controlling not just society, but controlling politics. They really have control over everything. And throughout this time period, throughout the 18th century, this is the time where we're going to turn to increasingly more slavery. We have some immigrants that are also moving into the South, but really the North is where the immigrants are going to really kind of gravitate towards, and we'll get into that in a second. Now the food chain itself, the southern food chain, who's at the top, who's at the bottom? It should be pretty self-explanatory for you, but we'll just take a look at it anyway. We have the plantation owners on the top. Again, as we just kind of discussed, they're the ones that control everything. Then you have those small kind of subsistence yeoman farmers. These are just the guys that are doing everything for themselves. They don't really have any extra labor. And then there's women down below that. And really, immigrants and women, I would say, are almost probably more equal. Women have no rights at this point. They can't vote. They can't speak out in public. They can't own property. Then there's immigrants. These people, there's Scots, there's Irish, there are some Germans down there, and they're, for the most part, at this time period, working right alongside the slaves. The only thing they really have going for them that's more beneficial is their skin color. Being that they have a lighter skin tone, they're going to be seen just that little bit ahead of African slaves that are at the bottom of the food chain, and they're really going to stay at the bottom of the food chain through the Civil War, and really as they become sharecroppers and beyond that, still at the bottom for probably about another 150 years at least. The triangular trade itself. How do these slaves get to the New World or to North America? The simple definition, the triangular trade itself is not just slaves. It's not just a slave trade, but it's also goods. It's goods and slaves being exchanged across the Atlantic itself. It's going to start here in Europe. And these Europeans are going to take their goods, their manufactured goods and guns, and send it down along the coast of Africa. Once they do that, they're going to trade with these coastal African tribes who have gone into the interior and bludgeoned a lot of the men over the heads in those interior tribes, put them in cages on the coast, and ready to trade. From there, they are going to be sent in these ships to a few areas. One of the worst slave areas that we've ever encountered is Brazil. They have the slave trade much longer, and actually slavery much longer than even we do here in the United States. So some of them get dropped off there. Other ones move on to the Caribbean, Hispaniola as they call it, or Cuba and Haiti, and what we call today. And then from there, they would be traded up to coastal Florida, and then up along the eastern seaboard of the United States. From the Caribbean area, once they would be shipped up to the southern colonies, from there, that's when they would be traded for sugar, cotton, anything else, raw materials that are going to be shipped back across to Europe. And you kind of see how the cycle will continue on over and over and over again. So the Middle Passage itself, what is it? First things first, Africans were branded for identification purposes. And some of you may see like tattoos today that are like brands and that kind of stuff. These are not like tattoos by any means. They're not on their arms, they're not on their backs. They're generally on the bottoms of their feet. Yes. Have you ever had a blister on your heel before? Think about getting burned severely on your feet. And it's not going to go away. You can get tattoos fade, for example. This is not going to go away. Okay. They get packed onto these ships into the kind of the bellows of the ship, or the galley, if you want to call it that. And they are packed shoulder to shoulder, side by side. And this is at a time where, again, no air conditioning, there's no airflow, there's no anything. Okay, so it's pretty brutal conditions for these people. They're shackled down. You can kind of see from this picture here the type of shackles that they're forced to wear, not just on their arms but also on their feet. So a lot of people have asked before, well, why didn't they just fight back? And maybe you've seen the movie Amistad. They are shackled, yes, which makes it very difficult, but also at the same time, these slave traders are starving these people. And if you've ever not eaten for a day, maybe, a day and a half, you know what it's like to be hungry, or if you're on a diet or something like that where you have no energy. And these people for a long time are being starved. So they don't have the energy to really rebel. You can kind of see here, this is what they look like once they get into either the slave ports there in the Caribbean. What they would do, you can kind of see the guy on the left there. They would grease them up to make them look better. They were looking for the biggest males possible. The females were sold kind of differently. So you can kind of see they're tying together, and you can just see how kind of demeaning that it is. Okay. Overall, in the Middle Passage, I would say 13% of those people, of African slaves, died. I think that's a conservative number. I think the number is much higher than that, out of all of the numbers of people that they brought across. And another question has been raised before. Well, why don't they just ship less at a time so they don't kill so many of them? Well, if you think about it in the sense of it's a numbers game, really. If you ship 1,000 of these people and 10% die, you're looking at 900 slaves still, for example. Now, this is a large scale. I don't even know if 1,000 would be even possible. I highly doubt it. You're probably looking at a couple hundred, but just bear with me for a moment. So you're shipping 1,000, you lose 10%, that's 900. Now, what if you ship 500, but everyone lives? So you can kind of see the idea here, okay? So 13% total die. You can see in this image here, this is a very good depiction of how closely these people are stationed or put in the bottoms of the ship. You can see women and men are separated, and boys in the center. They are shoulder to shoulder, and they really don't have much more room than their body composition area. Okay, you're going to see that right now. This is how tight they were packed in there. Okay, anybody slept in bunk beds as a kid? You can kind of, this is like bunk beds nightmare. Okay, so just count the amount of people there. Now the slaves itself, those that actually didn't make it all the way across the Atlantic, 80 to 90% of them worked in the fields. They're field hands. They're out there picking the cotton when it comes time to that, or they're harvesting the rice or tobacco or whatever that it is out in the field. The other 10 to 20% are working as domestic slaves or artisans, so they're bricklayers or craftsmen of any sort of thing like that. The domestic slaves itself, maybe they're nannies, maybe they're midwives, maybe they're maids. They're working inside the house. And those slaves are generally seen as a higher scale than those field hands. They're more, if you want to say, respected by those plantation owners, and more trust, again, if you want to call it that, is given to them. The life itself for those slaves is based on heritage. It's all based on their stories, on their music, and their resiliency is pretty amazing to keep the positive the positive vibes that they have throughout this whole thing. So one of the major revolts at this point is the Stoner Rebellion, and it's really going to scare a lot of the southern plantation owners here that the slaves could in fact maybe revolt and have this huge slave uprising. And after the Stoner Rebellion, they're really going to start clamping down on the slaves and slavery laws and what these people can and cannot do. Ultimately, it failed, but it does force those Southerners to tighten their slave laws. Now for our northern cities, ports. The North is going to have this distinct advantage of having pretty significant ports. Philadelphia and New York, for example. Philadelphia becomes the second largest port in the British Empire behind London. The South really only has one major port, so they're going to fall behind there in that sense. Industry, where you have in the South, you have those big plantation owners taking over and becoming wealthy and powerful. Merchants in the North are going to become powerful. Contrary to what the Southerners were with one cash crop, the North has many, many crops. The two main ones are wheat and corn, and they require less labor, so this is why we're going to see really virtually no slavery there in the North. Now, it did exist to some degree on very small scales, but overall, you don't need as much labor, so you don't need the amount of people. Okay, so industry, merchants becoming powerful. Think about the industry with shipping. The Enlightenment and the Great Awakening. The Enlightenment itself is truth through reason. People like Jefferson, people like Benjamin Franklin are going to start looking for things beyond religion. They're going to start looking at, especially with the Enlightenment, where the world is going to start to be governed by natural laws itself. Secondly, the Great Awakening itself, it's a revival of Christian values during the 1700s, but really the reason why, let's think about that. We have these Puritans back from the 1600s with their escaping persecution and wanting to practice their own values itself, but also the big part of the Great Awakening is these Puritans have fallen off the wagon. They have started to indulging themselves in large houses and material things, and the Great Awakening itself is a religious revival and is trying to get the Puritans and other religious groups that have fallen by the wayside back on track. And really what the effects of the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment itself are going to cause the colonists to start to question authority. And for them, that authority is the crown. And for the crown, that's going to mean some very bad things soon to come. And also it's going to stress the importance of the individual. It's not always about the crown right now. It's going to be about the individual. When we're talking about individual, it could even mean the individual colonies itself. So let's recap our 4 learning outcomes for today. What are cash crops? How do they differ between the North and the South? You should be able to answer this by now. Pretty, hopefully, self-explanatory. Number 2, what is the Middle Passage? And also think about the effects of the Middle Passage. Number 3, why is the Stoner Rebellion important? It is one of the first slave rebellions, and why is that important? Think about that. If you need to, go back and re-listen to it. And number 4, how did the Enlightenment and Great Awakening affect the colonists? Again, Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, a couple of our founding fathers are really going to be influenced by the Enlightenment and starting to think through reason, and reason itself is going to start to govern laws. Okay, so if you have any questions, see me in class. Or you could send me an email. Whatever else you need from me, find me on campus. I'm here to help whatever I can do. So until next time, Mr. Belcher, I'm out.